90 days. I can tell you within 90 days of project kickoff whether your ERP implementation is going to succeed or fail. Not because I'm guessing, not because I'm pessimistic, because failing projects always show the same warning signs in the first 3 months, and with a system that never quite delivers what was promised. Beyond the money, there's the human cost. Failed projects burn out staff. I've seen agencies lose key employees, their best people, because the project was so miserable they quit. Some went to other agencies, some left government entirely. The problem is, most people don't recognize these signs. They're too close to the project, they're too invested, they've never done this before, they're too busy fighting fires to notice the pattern. Or worse, they see the signs but convince themselves things will get better. We're just getting started. The vendor is still ramping up. Once we get through this phase, it'll be fine. It won't be fine, not unless you intervene. Today, I'm going to show you the 7 warning signs that predict project failure and what to do when you see them. So why 90 days? Why not 6 months or a year? And I'm dying to make a 90-day fiancé joke here, but I'm going to not do it. Well, 90 days because the first 90 days set the trajectory for everything that follows. The first 90 days are when culture gets established. How does this team communicate? How are decisions made? How are problems handled? These patterns form early and then calcify. If the culture is healthy at day 90, it'll probably stay healthy. If it's dysfunctional at day 90, it'll probably get worse. The first 90 days are when the relationship between your team and the software vendor's team is established. Is it a partnership or is it a transaction? Is there trust or suspicion? Is there honest communication or filtered messaging? These dynamics set in early. The first 90 days are when expectations get calibrated or miscalibrated. What your team expects, what the vendor's team expects, what leadership expects. If those expectations are aligned at day 90, you're in good shape. If they're already diverging, you're headed for conflict. Now, here's the painful reality. By the time most organizations realize they're in trouble, they're 12 to 18 months in and millions of dollars committed. Quick poll. How far into your current or last project before you realize something was wrong? 30 days, 90 days, a year? Drop your number in the comments. I want to know. The warning signs were there at day 30, at day 60, at day 90, but nobody was watching. Or people were watching, but they were hoping things would improve. Let's give it another month. Let's see if the new consultant helps. Let's not raise alarms yet. But then, month after month passes, and the problems compound. And suddenly, you're in a crisis that could have been prevented. The first 90 days are your early warning system. If you pay attention, you can catch problems when intervention is cheap, when you can have hard conversations, realign expectations, change direction, change milestone payments, or even exit the contract if necessary. At 90 days, all options are on the table. At 18 months, your only options are push through and pray, or start over at enormous cost. Neither one is good. Now, let me be concrete about what's at stake. An ERP implementation, government or not, typically costs $3 to $5 million or $15 million. For larger agencies, it can be $30 million, $50 million, or more for state government agencies or bigger organizations. That's not just software. That's implementation services, data migration, training, change management, project management, internal staff time, temporary staffing to backfill people pulled into the project, all of it. And most of that cost is sunk. You can't get it back. If you catch a problem at 90 days, you might be 10% into that budget. You have options. You can renegotiate, you can restructure, you can exit with a relatively small loss. If you catch a problem at 18 months, you're 60% or 70% into that budget, which means you've made payments to these vendors. What are you going to do? Walk away from $8 million in sunk costs? Start over from scratch? Probably not. So you push forward, hoping to salvage something. And often you do, but at enormous additional cost. Failed projects damage organizational trust. After a failed ERP implementation, try getting the council to approve another IT initiative. Try getting department heads to engage with the next project. Try getting staff to believe that this time will be different. The trauma of a failed project echoes for years. It makes the next project harder, and the project after that. Organizational scar tissue builds up, so yes, the stakes are high. That's why early detection matters. Let me tell you about a project I was asked to help rescue years ago. I'm calling it a rescue, but by the time we got involved, there wasn't much to rescue. It was more of a post-mortem for a still living patient. A county that had been implementing an ERP system for 2 years. The original timeline was 18 months. The original budget was $6 million. When I got the call, they were 200% over budget, 12 million and counting, and 18 months behind schedule. Best case, they were looking at another year. Worst case, they might never go live. The vendor was blaming the county for every delay. You didn't provide resources. Your requirements changed. Your data wasn't ready. The county was blaming the vendor. You promised things you couldn't deliver. Your consultants don't know what they're doing. You underbid the project, and now you're making it up in change orders. Both sides got lawyers involved. It was toxic. So when I dug into the project history, all the warning signs were there at day 60, every single one. Warning sign 1. The project manager that the vendor promised during the sales process never showed up. They substituted some junior, a person with 2 years of experience instead of 10. They said it was temporary while the senior person finished another project. That temporary person was still there 2 years later. The senior PM never showed up. Warning sign number 2. The kickoff meeting went straight to system configuration. There was no business process discussion, no documentation of current state, no validation of requirements, no validation of the future state. They started building before they understood what they were building. So by the time they realized the requirements were wrong, they'd already configured half the system. Warning sign 3. Key stakeholders missed the first 3 steering committee meetings. The finance director sent a delegate. 2 department heads didn't show at all. Too busy. That told me everything about organizational commitment. If the executives weren't prioritizing the project at kickoff, when energy should be highest, what would happen at month 12 when things got hard? I'm going to pause here. How many of these things have you seen on your projects? Be honest. 0, 1, 2, or all 3. Comment below before I give you the rest. Warning sign 4. The vendor's weekly status reports were consistently optimistic even when milestones were being missed. On track, minor delay, will recover, green status. Meanwhile, the project was actually slipping, but no one was saying it clearly. The status reports were fiction. Warning sign 5. The county's project manager was afraid to push back. When I interviewed her later, she said, "I didn't want to be difficult. They're the experts. I figured they knew what they were doing." That fear cost the county millions. By the way, that project manager also had a weird feeling in her gut that she never followed up on, never asked the tough questions of the vendor. Now, if someone had intervened at day 60, if someone had had direct, uncomfortable conversations, this project could have been saved. Your PM isn't senior enough. We need the person you promised, or we need to talk about what this means for the project. We're not starting configuration until we've documented our business processes. This is non-negotiable. Executive attendance at steering committee is mandatory. If people can't attend, we reschedule. These status reports don't match reality. We need honest reporting or we can't manage this project. Any of these conversations could have changed the trajectory, but no one had them. Everyone assumed things would get better. They didn't. Let me tell you another story about a project that recognized the warning signs and acted on them. A city was implementing a new financial system. Different vendor than the disaster story, but similar size project, about 5 million, 18-month timeline. At day 45, the project manager noticed something concerning. The vendor's lead consultant was smart, experienced, capable, but she was only on site 2 days a week. Now, this is different now, post-COVID, when we're doing implementations over Zoom or Teams. But on-site time is critical. The rest of the week, she was working on another project. The status report said everything was fine, but the project manager did the math. They were getting maybe 20 hours a week of senior consultant time. For a project this complex, that wasn't enough. And it wasn't definitely not what was promised in the contract. She raised the concern with the vendor. They were reassuring. She's very efficient. She's managing both projects well. Don't worry. She raised the concern again 2 weeks later. Same reassurance. At day 60, she escalated this to the city's project sponsor, the finance director. Together, they had a direct conversation with the vendor's account executive. We're concerned about consultant availability. We contracted for a dedicated lead consultant. We're getting a part-time resource. This isn't what we agreed to. And what happened was, because that consultant was part-time, the city's already strained resources had to pick up the slack. So the vendor pushed back. The consultant is meeting all deliverables. Everything is on schedule. The city held firm. We don't care about the current status. We care about the trajectory. If we are under-resourced now, we'll be in trouble later. We need a dedicated consultant, or we need to talk about restructuring the engagement. After 2 weeks of uncomfortable conversations, the vendor made a change. They reassigned the consultant to be full-time on the city's project. They brought in another person to cover her other engagement. The project proceeded. It wasn't perfect. No project is. But it stayed on budget and reasonably on schedule. So they went live within a month of the original target. Would it have succeeded without the early intervention? Maybe, but probably not. Under-resourcing compounds. Small delays become big delays. And once a project is months behind, catching up is nearly impossible. And it's worse if you've been making milestone payments or payments on the original schedule, but you're not getting what you asked for or contracted for. So the city's project manager saw the pattern at day 45. She acted at day 60, and that early action changed the outcome. That's what 90-day awareness looks like in practice. So if you want to learn more about how to spot these red flags, check this video. Now let me give you all 7 warning signs and what to do about each one. Here are the 7 90-day warning signs of ERP failure. I'm going to explain each one, tell you why it matters, and give you specific actions to take. If you see one of these, pay attention. If you see 3 or more, your project is in serious trouble and you need to act immediately. Warning sign 1, vendor staffing substitutions. What to watch for? The people who sold you the project aren't the people showing up to do the work. Keep in mind, timing matters. You released an RFP last year, you got proposals in this year, you did demos, you did contract negotiations. So the resources promised last year may not be available genuinely this year. But before you start the project, you need to get the vendor to at least match the caliber of people that were promised. The experienced project manager is swapped for someone who's ramping up is not okay. The industry expert is suddenly not available for this phase. So why does it matter? Vendors often use their A team to win deals and their B team to deliver them. The A team is expensive, in demand, and deployed where it has the most impact, which is sales, not implementation. But if you've evaluated the vendor based on the A team, your confidence came from their experience and expertise. When they substitute, you're not getting what you bought. This is especially true when you need specific subject matter expertise, for example, K-12 school implementations. So what do you do in this case? In your contract, specify key personnel by name. Include a clause that requires your approval for substitutions. And if substitutions happen anyway, escalate immediately. Don't accept reassurances. Demand either the promised resources or a conversation about what the change means for the project. Warning sign number 2. Scope discussions are already contentious. So what do you watch for? You're having frequent arguments about what's in scope versus out of scope. The vendor keeps referring to things as change orders that you thought were included. You're hearing phrases like, that's not how we interpreted the requirements, or that'll be a phase 2 item. It matters because if you're fighting about scope at day 30, imagine what it'll be like at month 18 when the project is stressed and tempers are short. It happens. Early scope conflict is a symptom of misaligned expectations, and misaligned expectations don't fix themselves. Stop and realign. Get both sides in the room and walk through the scope document line by line, clarify every ambiguous item, document the agreed interpretation in writing. If you can't reach agreement, you have a contract problem. Better to involve legal and renegotiate now than to fight about it for the next 2 years. Warning sign number 3. Configuration before documentation. If the vendor is building system configuration before you've validated your business processes, they're making design decisions based on assumptions rather than documented requirements. So when you ask about your configuration choice or a configuration choice, they'll say, well, we'll validate that later, or that's our standard approach. This matters because if you configure a system before you understand the processes it supports, you will have to rebuild later, guaranteed, because it's not going to work. And the rework cost is enormous, not just the vendor's time to reconfigure, but the testing you have to redo, the training materials you have to update, the timeline extensions that cascade through the project. Instead, insist on process documentation before configuration. I don't care what the vendor's methodology is. If they're jumping to configuration without understanding your operations, slow them down. Create a design freeze checkpoint. No configuration work starts until current state processes are documented, future state processes are designed, and the stakeholders have signed off. And the stakeholders are the people that will use the system. Warning sign 4. Stakeholders don't show up. Key executives are missing steering committee meetings, department heads are sending delegates to working sessions. People are canceling discovery interviews because they are too busy. And it matters because an ERP implementation is an organizational priority or it isn't. This isn't just a technology implementation. This is changing fundamentally your organization, how it works. If senior people aren't showing up, one of two things is true. Either they don't actually think this project is important, or they're overwhelmed and haven't been given permission to reprioritize. Either way, you're headed for trouble. Now, without executive engagement, decisions don't get made. Without department head participation, requirements aren't accurate. Without stakeholder involvement, change management fails because it has to come from the top. So what do you do in this situation? You need to make attendance expectations clear from the start, and it has to come from the chief executive of the organization. Steering committee attendance is required, not optional. If you can't attend, we reschedule the meeting. If people still don't show, escalate. Have the project sponsor have direct conversations with absent parties. Find out what's really going on. Maybe they need coverage for their day job. Maybe they have concerns they haven't voiced yet. Maybe they're passively resisting the project. Surface the issue, don't ignore it. Warning sign 5, the timeline is already slipping. You're behind schedule at 90 days. Milestones that were supposed to happen in month 2 are sliding to month 3. Deliverables are almost done, but not quite. The project plan keeps being revised to push dates out. And this matters a lot because slippage accelerates. If you're 2 weeks behind at 90 days, you'll be 4 weeks behind at 180 and 2 months behind at the year mark. Early slippage also reveals planning problems. Either the original timeline was unrealistic or the execution is flawed. Either way, you need to understand why and recalibrate. So what do? You don't accept we'll make it up later. You won't. Physics doesn't work that way. Time doesn't work that way. Work needs to be done when it was planned or you have to replan. When you see slippage, stop and analyze. Why are we behind? Is it a resource issue, a scope issue, a dependency issue? Understand the root cause before you decide what to do. And then reset the timeline realistically. Project plans, project timelines are living, breathing documents. They're dynamic. They're not set in stone. But if you don't keep an eye on slippages, those small slippages add up and then you're faced with an avalanche of change. So a plan you don't believe is worthless. It's better to have an honest schedule that you can actually meet. Warning sign number 6. Communication is filtered. The vendor only talks to your project manager. They're not communicating directly with department heads, with executives, with end users. All information flows through a single point. Now keep in mind, there's a difference between formal reporting and informal conversations. Always keep in mind what the conversation's about. Status meetings are presentations, not conversations. If status meetings are presentations, they're not conversations. Questions are deferred. Let's take that offline. We'll put it in the parking lot. We'll get back to you. That's on our list. When communication is filtered, information gets lost, intentionally or not. The project manager becomes a bottleneck. Bad news gets softened. Concerns don't surface until they're crises. Now, you also lose the opportunity for course correction when you don't know what's going on. When executives hear directly from the vendor, they form their own impressions. When department heads interact with the implementation team, they catch disconnects early. So what do you do in this situation? You create multiple communication channels. The vendor should present to your steering committee directly. Department heads should have working sessions with the vendor's functional consultants. That's what defines the configurations. Executives should have periodic check-ins with the vendor's account team. If the vendor resists this transparency, that's another warning sign. Warning sign 7. The team is afraid to ask hard questions. I see this a lot. So what happens is your team accepts vendor explanations without challenge. They don't push back on decisions that they're uncomfortable with. So when the vendor says, trust us, they trust. In meetings, there's deference. They're the experts. I'm sure they know what they're doing. I don't want to be difficult. It matters that you're difficult or perceivably difficult because the power dynamic is wrong. This is your project. You're the customer. You should be able to ask any question, challenge any decision, push back on any recommendation. If your team is afraid to do that, you're not getting their best thinking. You're not catching mistakes. You're not course correcting when the vendor is wrong. And the vendor is definitely sometimes wrong. They're not gods. They're consultants who've done this before. But every project is different. They need your pushback to get it right. So what do? You model the behavior you want. As a leader, asking hard questions in meetings, challenging assumptions, making it safe for your team to do the same. You're the buyer. Keep that in mind always. Have explicit conversations about the dynamic. It's okay to disagree. It's okay to push back. That's how we get a good outcome. And if your team is still deferential, figure out why. Are they overwhelmed, intimidated, lacking confidence? And they're not alone. Most clients who we help haven't done this before. So it's natural to be falling into these traps. But underlying issues, you need to address them. Which of these 7 hit closest to home for you right now? Tell me in the comments. And if you're seeing 3 or more, we should definitely talk. So those are the 7 warning signs. Let me recap. Vendor staffing substitutions, contentious scope discussions, configuration before documentation of processes, stakeholder no-shows, slipping timelines, filtered communications, and if your team is afraid to ask the hard questions. One of these is a concern, 3 or more is a crisis. So you've identified warning signs in your project. Now what? Step 1, document specifically. Don't just note we're concerned. Write down exactly what you're seeing, when it happened, why it's a problem. On March 15, the vendor's lead consultant was reassigned. We were promised senior resources. This concerns us because. So documentation creates accountability. It also protects you if things go wrong. Step 2, escalate internally. Don't try to fix this alone. Bring your concerns to the project sponsor, to executive leadership. The people with the authority to act understand what's happening. Step 3, have direct conversations with the vendor. No hints, not polite suggestions, direct, clear conversations about the problem and what needs to change. We're concerned about the go-live date. Here's the evidence. Here's what we need to see happen by when. Step 4, establish decision points. If things don't improve in 30 days, what will you do? Have that answer ready. Maybe you escalate to the vendor's executive team. Maybe you invoke contract remedies. Maybe you pause the project. Know your options before you need them. Step 5, be willing to take action. The warning signs are only useful if you act on them. If you see problems, document the problems, discuss the problems, and then do nothing, you haven't accomplished anything. Early action is cheap. Late action is expensive. That's the whole point. Some actions feel dramatic, pausing a project, replacing a vendor resource, invoking contract clauses, but the cost of inaction is usually worse than the cost of action. A few uncomfortable weeks now versus years of painful recovery later. Here's what I want you to do. If you're in the first 90 days of an implementation or about to start one, print the list of warning signs. Review them every week. Honestly, assess what you're seeing. If you're past 90 days, do the assessment anyway. Better late than never. What you'll find is these warning signs have been showing up from day one. And if you're seeing 3 or more of these warning signs, take action this week, not next month, this week. Have the conversations, escalate the concerns, get ahead of the problem before it gets worse. Tell me in the comments, which of these warning signs are you seeing in your current project? Or which ones did you see in the past projects that you wish you had acted on sooner? I read every comment and I'll offer my thoughts on specific situations. Thanks for watching. Early detection saves projects. It saves money. It saves careers. It saves organizational trust. The warning signs are always there. You just have to look for them and have the courage to act on what you see. Check out this video on project failure patterns